Hilchos Shechitah, Perek Chamishi, the laws of ritual slaughter, chapter 5. From here, at least for the next 6 days, we're moving on to another category in these laws. This is no longer going to be about how to slaughter and all the laws that relate to the slaughter itself. This is a separate category that relates to preparing food in a kosher way, but nothing to do with the act of slaughter. This is called trephos. Treifa. Treifa means literally an animal that was mortally wounded. As we defined it in the last set of laws, it's an animal that got a wound that cannot live for 12 months. Once an animal gets such a wound, ritual slaughter won't help it. It's already considered to be a treifa. Even if you slaughter it, the meat is not kosher, as we explained in the laws of forbidden foods. The Rambam here, for the next 6 days, will go on to define what are such wounds that consider an animal to be mortally wounded. As we're going to discover, this is not up to every person to decide. The sages gave us a tradition of exactly which wounds are considered mortal, and that's the ones that we follow, nothing else. Even if later on we discover that a wound causes a mortal issue, or we have medicine that can stop one of the sages' mortal wounds from becoming mortal, doesn't matter. Once an animal gets such a wound, boom, it's a treifa, it's out. And that's the discussion we're embarking on for close to a week, God willing. Says the Rambam Malacha Aleph, Kvar be'arnu b'hilchos yisurei ma'acholes. We've already explained in the laws of forbidden foods, sha'atreifa ha'amura b'Torah. When the Torah says, basar basada treifa lo yisechelu, flesh that was torn apart in the field, you shall not eat. When the Torah says treifa, while the description is an animal that was pounced on and torn apart, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Hi hanoita lamos. It means an animal that's going to die within the next 12 months. The only reason the Torah said treifa, which literally again means torn apart, is because Torah was describing a commonplace case. That's what used to happen. That's how animals got mortally wounded, because they were attacked. Like a lion pounces on it, breaks it, and it didn't yet die. But there are definitely other sicknesses. If they happen to an animal, it's considered in the category of a treifa. It's going to die, and therefore, whatever you do to it will not change its status. They were all received as an oral tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai. There were 8 types of mortal wounds that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai. In other words, there's actually going to be 70, as we'll see, but they all fit into 8 categories. The Eluhain, they are the following. Drusa. Drusa means pounced upon. That's going to be today's topic. Nikuva, an animal that was punctured in a specific way. That's going to be tomorrow and the next day, chapter 6 and 7. Chaseira, an animal that's missing certain limbs naturally from birth. Nitula, or an animal that had certain limbs removed. Those 2 are discussed in chapter 8. Psuka, certain limbs were snapped. Krua, certain flesh of it was torn. Nefula, or if an animal had fallen. Those 3 are going to be discussed in chapter 9. Ushvura, and an animal that was broken in certain places, especially its ribs, that's going to be discussed in chapter 10. These are the different types of categories of mortal wounds. Even though they were all received in tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai, since the one mentioned clearly, explicitly in the Torah is the one where it was pounced, actual treifa, actually torn apart, hechmiruba. The sages were strict when it came to this type of mortal wound. The chol safek sheyistapek bedrusa aser. Anytime there's a doubt in the area of pouncing, the animal is forbidden. Ushar shiva mine tarfas. But the other 7 types of treif animals, yesh bahen sveikin mutarin, there are some cases of doubt where we actually permit the animal kameshi yisbar, as will be explained in the coming chapters, God willing. So the Rambam begins today and spends the whole chapter defining the first one, drusa. Hadrusa. What does it mean when an animal is pounced upon? Hu sheyitreif ha'ari v'chayetze bay habehema v'yidres aleha biyadai. A lion, or something like a lion, pounces onto an animal and preys on it with its paws, with its hands, with its claws specifically. A yidres hanetz v'hanesher v'chayetze bahen ala oif. Or a hawk and an eagle pounces onto a bird. That's what pouncing looks like. And as we're going to see, it's quite an interesting phenomenon when it comes to pouncing. The way the Talmud describes it is that the issue of the pounce is not so much that the pounce is going to reach an internal organ which is going to disqualify it and make it mortally wounded. Those types of internal damages are going to go into the other 7 categories. There's a special issue when it comes to pouncing, which, as the Talmud describes it, allows an animal to release poison from its claws into the animal. And it's that poison which itself poses a problem. How we resolve it today is a bit of an issue. Some explain it to be a bacteria that was present in the animal's claws. Others have different explanations, but we're going to go with the Talmudic explanation, and that's what's going to be our guiding principle, the idea of the poison that's present in the claws of the animal or the bird that it's transmitting to the prey upon which it's pouncing. So, the basic form that pouncing takes is when a lion pounces on an animal, a hawk pounces on a bird. Ve'ein drisa, bebehema gasa, ubechaya gasa, a big, what's called a thicker animal, a cow, as pictured on the top, cannot be considered pounced, elo la'ari bilvad, only if it's pounced upon by a lion. Only a lion can transmit the poison, in the Talmudic language, to a cow. Any other animal pounces on a cow, it's not going to have that effect. Ubibehema daka, if we're talking about a thinner animal, like a sheep or a goat, minaze'evo l'mayla. Any animal, wolf size or larger, that pounces on it will have the pounce effect and disqualify it. Ubigdayim utlayim, if we're dealing with kid goats, kid lambs, then afilu chasol v'shual unemiya, even a cat or a fox or a marten, v'chayetze or the like, they're much smaller. Yesh lahen drisa, they can have the pouncing effect on such a kid goat or a kid lamb. B'kol shekin ba'ifes, certainly on birds. So that's the three categories. Bigger animals can only be pounced by a lion. Middle size only be pounced by a wolf or larger. Small size or birds can be pounced upon even by these smaller animals and considered to be treif. V'haneitz, a hawk, yesh lo drisa va'afilu ba'oif gadol mimeno, can have a pouncing effect even on a bird larger than it. Avol shara ifes hadersim. But other preying birds, yesh lahen drisa ba'oif shekemoison, can only have a pouncing effect on a bird of their size, ve'ein lahen drisa ba'oif she'u gadol mihen, but doesn't have a pouncing effect on a bird that's larger than them. Vav v'yesh lechulda drisa ba'oifes. A weasel can have a pouncing effect on a bird, even though it's larger than it. The kelev ein lo drisa kol ikar. A dog can never have a pouncing effect, loy ba'oif v'loy b'behema v'chaya, not on a bird or on an animal or a beast. Ve'haneitz, and a hawk, while it's in the bird category, yesh lo drisa bigdayim utloyim, could have a pouncing effect on a kid goat or a kid lamb, v'hu sheyikoiv b'tziparnav lebeis hachalol, provided, in the case of a bird attacking an animal, that it digs its claws all the way into the internal cavity of the animal. Not because it's going to puncture the internal cavity, but as the sages point out, this is the only case in which a bird will be able to release its poison into the animal, only if it reaches the internal cavity. When a bird attacks another bird, even if it doesn't go to the internal cavity, the poison is released. But with an animal, it has to make the hole all the way to the internal cavity. Says the Rambam Halacha Zayin, ein drisa ella biyada toirif. The pouncing effect is only achieved when done with the forelegs of the preying animal. Aval beragla, but with the hind legs, ein chayshishin la. We don't worry. Again, this is the poison concept. The poison apparently only comes out through the forelegs, not in the hind legs. The ein drisa ella batzipayda, and additionally, the pouncing effect can only be had with the claw. That's where the bacteria, that's where the poison is. Aval bashain, done with the teeth. The animal simply bites into another animal, doesn't have the effect. Ein chayshishin la, we don't have to worry. Elohim kein nikavad beis hachalal, unless of course the teeth were dug in all the way to the internal cavity, then you have other issues. Boitkin shema nikav echad min ha'evarim shenitrefes b'nikivasan, in which case we'd have to check the animal, perhaps it got a hole or a puncture in one of the ways, or in one of the limbs, which can become treif through a puncture. But for the pouncing effect, no. Teeth do not do that, only the claws. Additionally, the pouncing effect can only be achieved when done with intent on behalf of the predator. But if the predator, the preying animal or bird, just falls and its claws land in the animal which is then pounced on, that will not have the pouncing effect. The poison again will not be released in that scenario. Similarly, the pouncing effect can only be achieved while the predator is alive. But if it stuck its claws in and was then killed in the moment of the pouncing, while its claws are still in the pounced animal, and it only removed its claws after its death, we do not worry about it, because as the commentaries explain, the poison is released through the claws, but only upon the removal of the claws. If it didn't have a chance to remove its claws while it was alive, it's not going to have the pouncing effect. The Ketzad din hadrusa, what is the law governing an animal that was pounced. Kol makom she'amarnu chayshishin la, wherever in these last few halachot we said you have to worry about the pounce. Shechitah nes hanitraf ubeidkin kol hachalal shalai, we slaughter the animal which was pounced in a kosher way, and then we check the entire internal cavity mikaf hayarech ala kadkod, from the back of the thigh till the skull. If it was found complete, intact, from all types of disqualifying factors, and no mark of the pounce is discovered inside, it's permitted, but if you find the mark of the pouncing, that's a treifa and it's forbidden biblically. What's called a mark of the pounce? The flesh opposite the intestines needs to become red. As the commentaries explain, when you see a redness in the flesh above the intestines, that's a sign that ultimately the poison has gotten there, and it's going to cause the intestines to puncture, which will then disqualify the animal on account of being punctured. Kesef Mishneh explains that while the Rambam chose the intestines, the truth is of any other internal limb which could be punctured and then disqualified, if the flesh above them is red, that's a sign that the poison reached there. It will ultimately puncture that organ and make the animal also treif. But if the flesh didn't become red, it just decayed opposite the intestines, till it would become like flesh which a doctor would scrape off of a wound, that's how decayed it was. We treat that flesh as though it's lacking, and the animal is treif on that account. If the pouncing was done onto the animal's signs, in other words, the two pipes, the windpipe and the food pipe, it wasn't pounced upon in a different area of its body. It was pounced upon by its neck. Mishayadimu treifa. When the pipes themselves become red, then it's treif. While when it came to another organ, all we needed is for the meat around it to be red. When it comes to the pipes, they themselves have to be red. They're more resilient and more tough, and only if they themselves become red is it treif. Udrisasam b'mashu, the pouncing effect can take place even at the slightest amount. Kevan shehednim bahen kolshu machmas drisa treifa. Even the smallest amount of them became red because of the pounce. They're treif. Sfeik drusa. If we're in doubt whether an animal was pounced upon, asura chatibadik kidrusa badayis. It's forbidden until it will be checked, like a case when we know that it was certainly pounced upon. How do you have a case of a doubtful pounce? Ketzah, what does that look like? Says the Rambam, Arisha nichnas lebein shvarim. A lion enters a group of oxen. And you find the claw stuck into the back of one of the oxen. We have to worry, maybe it was the lion who was wandering about here before, put its claw into the ox. We do not say that maybe it was scratching against the wall and got itself a claw in from the wall. It came probably from the lion. Now, we have to remember, we said before that the poison only enters the animal at the removal of the claw. So if we're seeing the claw in the animal, why would that be reason to consider it pounced? The poison wouldn't have been released. Different suggestions have been brought forth. Some say that it's because when the animal removed its leg, even though the claw remained inside, the act of removal released the poison even through that claw. Others suggest an animal doesn't just put in one claw. If the lion put in its whole paw with all of its claws, yes, one claw remained, but that's a sign that the other claws were put in and taken out, and the poison was released through those claws. Similarly, if you have an ox or a marten that goes into a group of birds, or you have a fox, an ox? A fox or a marten goes into a group of birds. Here's a fox with chickens. And the fox is quiet and they're crowing. We have to worry that their clamor, their noise is coming because this fox pounced on one of them. But if he was roaring and they were crowing, they're simply clamoring because of the noise and the fear that he instills in them, but not because he actually pounced. Similarly, if he cut off the head of one of the animals, one of the birds, that's already a sign of his fury. His rage has calmed. He certainly didn't pounce any further. If they're both quiet, we don't have to worry. Because had he damaged, they would be crowing. What if we're in doubt if a praying animal even came in here or not? Or we saw him come in, but we don't know if it's the proper animal which could have the pouncing effect on these animals or these birds. No need to worry. It's a double doubt. We're in doubt whether he's even in the status of a pouncing animal or if he came in, and even if he did, we're in doubt whether he pounced. Similarly, if a bird took a trip to an area covered in trees, or reeds, and it came out with its head or its neck dripping blood, we don't have to worry, perhaps it was pounced upon. We simply say it probably got damaged by the trees, not by a pouncing effect.